Okay, welcome to our Erev Shabbat Parashat class. Parashat Beshalah. What an incredibly eventful, dramatic, exciting, historic parasha. The parasha of Shirat Hayam, the parasha of the man, of the event of Mei Meriva. What isn't in this parasha? But let's talk about the phenomenon of Amalek, which is introduced to us for the first time in this parasha, but you can say to some extent inconspicuously, and we'll talk about why. When you talk about the event that occurred in this parasha of Amalek, the instructions and the perspective of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is both current and futuristic, meaning Amalek seemingly attacked Am Yisrael, Vayabo Amalek, and he fought with them. And Hashem instructed, Moshe instructed Yehoshua ben Nun, B'halanu anashim v'seid lahem b'Amalek. They're talking about dealing with the current, Amalek's fighting, and choose an army and defend ourselves, fight with Amalek. And we know the continuation, of course, as Moshe ascended the mountain, and when his hands were up, it indicated victory, or a victorious track. His hands were up for so many hours that they got tired, and Aharon and Hud were there to help support his arms. And finally, Yehoshua weakened, and his army weakened Amalek, and seemingly that indicates and implies victory. And then the futuristic piece to this episode is that Hashem instructs Moshe, record this as a memory in the book, which is peculiar because everything's recorded in the book. V'sim be'oznei Yehoshua, placed in the ears of Yehoshua, a term that we very seldom see, but we saw in last week's parasha, in Makat Arbeh, Leman tesaped be'oznei bencha be'mincha, placing something in someone's ears. And what is that? Hashem said, I will, not you guys. I will wipe out Amalek from under the sun. Moshe built a Mizbeach, he called it Hashem Nisi, and then Hashem said, Vayomer Kiyad al Kesya Milchaman Adonai ba'Amalek midor dor. Because a hand is on the kiss of God, a war of God to Amalek, from generation to generation. There are many interpretations of that pasuk. Some say the war that must be fought against Amalek is only when there is a yad al kesya, which means there is a kiseh. Midrash says a kiseh malchut, a throne, an Am Yisrael, a rulership, a king ruling Am Yisrael, which is why the mizvah of destroying Amalek only kicked in when Shaul HaMelech became king. There are other explanations. Possibly the most well-known one is referring to the Yad al-Kesya, the challenge, the confrontation, the attack, the antagonizer, the enemy al-Kesya, on the throne, and their kes is short for kiseh. Whenever there is an attack, an affront to the throne or the, let's say, authority of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Yah is pointed out to be a half of God's Yud Ke Vav Ke name, meaning that causes an incompletion of God's name. As long as that's the case, there'll be an ongoing war between God and Amalek, midor dor, for generations, which basically is a prediction that seems to have lasted, right? We still have this mizvah, not to forget and to erase the memory of Amalek. It's a whole new discussion, different discussion as to, does Amalek exist? What are we wiping out these days? But here, the indication by the pasuk is we have an eternal war against Amalek as long as it's a challenge to the throne of God. As long as HaKadosh Baruch Hu's rulership and authority is being challenged, meaning that there are those that are non-believers who therefore go against God and God's proxy, which is his nation, which is us. As long as that challenge exists, the war will exist between God and Amalek. Now, the only problem is we don't really know why, at least from this group of Pesukim. There is no indication exactly as to what Amalek did to deserve such a distinction, that there'll be a constant, unending, eternal battle, a struggle between Hashem and by extension God's nation versus this Amalek. Why? Why? There are so many other enemy nations that we've had. And in fact, even one with the same descendancy, and that's Edom. And Edom, not only don't we have this charge to have and be an eternal enemy of, but Edom, in fact, we're even instructed that al teta'ev adomi, that you can't reject them, their lineage, should they come into your nation for too many generations, just 3 generations. So we are at this point in the text, in the book of Shemot, in Parashat Beshalah, in a daze. We have this most harsh approach to this enemy nation without really understanding what they did. And it's critical, therefore, for us to understand the what of Amalek and the why of Amalek. Why did they do whatever they did? What did they do? Now, our first impulse would be to turn back to the beginning of the story over here. Indeed, what does the Pasuk say? And yet we're left with very little information, almost none. Really, 5 words. Vayabo Amalek, vayilachem and Yisrael. But Fidim is the place. And he came, him is representing of the entire nation, and fought with Israel. That's all we have. We're at a loss. There are really no indications in the text of the episode in real time in Parashat Beshalah, what we're given right now, which spans in chapter Yud Zayin, Perek 17, Pasuk Het through Pasuk Tet Zayin, short 9 Pesukim, no indications, besides the fact that he fought with us, which is certainly not a good act, but doesn't seem to be one deserving of this distinction, to be the eternal enemy of God with a never-ending quest to wipe him out. So the truth is that we're not short of facts in terms of what he did, and we'll take a trip in a moment to a place in the Torah that provides us with that information. But what we can start off in terms of the why is at least indicating what is not the reason that Amalek attacked us. What can't be attributed to his decision to fight against and war against Am Yisrael? What are the conventional reasons why nations go to war? Most conventionally and justifiably would be self-defense. Obviously, it's not a reason here. We know not of Am Yisrael attacking and going out of their way to lift a finger against anyone. Sometimes it would be not so much a defense, but a proactive gesture, but in revenge for something that was done in the past. We took revenge against Midian much later in the Torah. No indication either of some type of revenge that they're taking against us, because what have we done wrong, seemingly? Then there is conventional, more we call quote unquote positive warfare, where one may engage in war to expand their boundaries and therefore to annex eventually some of the boundaries of a neighboring country to you. That certainly is not the case, since there are no boundaries. We're a nomad wandering nation at this point. Sometimes it could be to take advantage of the natural resources of that nation in certain areas within their borders. Again, we have no actual permanent land to our name to speak of such resources. And therefore, there's almost no reason plainly seeing that we can even think of that this nation would attack us, except for maybe the very superficial reason to plunder us and to take the spoils, our property, doesn't seem to be a motivation for a nation to go to war against another nation. So let's leave that aside, because really it's bewildering at this point as to why. In terms of the what they did, not that difficult as we jump to the end of the Torah, close to the end, towards the end of the book of Devarim, the very end of Parashat Ki Teseh, the source actually for the mitzvah of erasing the name of Amalek, because in our parasha, it was Hashem talking. I will do it. In Parashat Ki Teseh, we read, of course, Parashat Zachor, not so long from now. We read about the directive to Am Yisrael. And within that, in a matter of really 2 Pesukim, there's all the description that we need in terms of what this evil people perpetrated against us. In fact, we can even make a list going in order of the wording, very simply, using the help of some midrashim and mefarshim, but not too far beyond the surface to just address the points of their evil. So here we go. We're in Parashat Ki Teseh. It's Perek Kafeh, chapter 25. In the book of Devarim, of course, Pasuk Yud Zayin. And we know these words so famously, Zachor, et asher asa lecha Amalek. Remember what he did. What did he do? First, there's location given. Baderech b'shedechem Mitzrayim. But just in those words alone, we could start listing their iniquities and their guilt and their sins. Baderech. In other words, they were certain to jump on a nation that was not established. They were in transit. They were traveling. They were not organized. They were just let out of another nation, and they're clearly at a great disadvantage. So they were baderech. Besetechem in Mitzrayim. When they came out of Egypt. Now, on one hand, that indicates that they took advantage of this weak slave nation, but we'll address weakness in the next pasuk. What does Besetechem in Mitzrayim really indicate? Well, if you go back to our parasha in Shirat Hayam, what was the reaction to the rest of the world, the fact that we were Yosem in Mitzrayim? It was absolute awe, fear, right? As indicated by one of our participants now. They're all, the nations, we're listing them, are all trembling in fear. In fact, 40 years later, when Yeshua sent the spies to Canaan, they were still melting in fear. And yet, this nation, Besetechem and Mitzrayim, had the absolute opposite reaction, which indicates absolute arrogance, a complete denial, which is preposterous, a denial of all those miraculous events. So it was Bederech, it was Besetechem and Mitzrayim. Asher karecha baderech. And this is such an interesting word, the word karecha. And Rashi, and based on the Midrashim, brings us so many different possible root words. The etymology of this karecha. One of them is mikre, happenstance, right? Happenstance, on one hand, implies they had no reason. They had no reason, it was happenstance. On the other hand, also implies, and this attaches itself to Besetechem and Mitzrayim, that was also their attitude, that nothing has a reason, everything's happenstance. There is no divine power and creator, there's no God. Karecha. Another root of karecha, from Lashon keri, tum'ah. They defiled and impurified us. And another root of karecha, again brought by Rashi on this pasuk, is cold. We were hot, so to speak. We were on fire. We were a nation representing God, which on their behalf, supernatural. The supernatural was done on their behalf. We just had kriyat shamsu and cooled us off. Karecha. So we can put on our list 3 different points of guilt in that word karecha, which will leave us to 5. The next word says baderech again. And this baderech leads into the next words of Vaizanev becha kol hanechashalim acharecha. Vaizanev from Lashon zanav, meaning they jumped to the end. Who's at the end? Very often, the end is the weaker people, the stragglers, people that can't keep up, which also indicates the fact that what they did, and this Barbanel points out, is an ambush. And it also points out that they were cowards, and that with their powerful army and the lack thereof of Am Yisrael, they still couldn't confront us straightforwardly from the front end. It had to be from the back end. It had to be an ambush, and it had to be taking advantage of the weaker. And indeed, it says, all those who were weak, attacking women and children and elderly and sick. And finally, on top of that, you as a nation as a whole were tired, you were sick, you were worn out, you were traveling through a desert, you didn't have resources, you were samez, as she said, you were thirsty, as we know from the previous episode of Me Meribah, Masal Meribah, that they weren't well nourished. All of that put together means absolutely purposefully taking advantage of a people when they're at their weakest point, without any fear of God, with no conscience. And what we have, we just add up all the factors, is a nation that is sadistic, that is cruel, that is arrogant, that is pretty much atheistic, it would seem by their behavior, that is at the same time cowardice nation, a nation that is without any mercy and compassion. And you put all that together, that's one big package of evil. So the what, while we had one word in our parasha, Vayabu Amalek, and perhaps that one word becomes the package for all the details, we know from Parashat Ki Teseh that there are so many whats in terms of describing their evil. But we still haven't gotten to the why. What was their motivation? Fine, their evil. But can't you express your evil in a situation that maybe is more advantageous to you? Do you have nothing else better to do than attack a nomad nation? And what turns out in one single word to be their motivation is nothing other than the worst and most ancient emotion and mindset of the human race, and that is hatred. That is pure hatred. How do we know this? We know this because of who Amalek is. Amalek is the name of a person, actually, is the son of Eliphaz, who was the son of Esav. So we know that this nation was founded by the grandson of Esav. And that grandson of Esav had a lot of information from his grandfather, because his grandfather was the one that was there during that episode with Yitzhak Avinu, when the predictions were given as to what the role would be with the nation, descendants of Yitzhak, of Yaakov rather, as opposed to the descendants of Esav. And it was there he was given the terrible news that in the long run, that you'd be subject to that Jewish nation, to Yaakov. But in the meanwhile, you can have the upper hand. It's very possible that you'll actually be dominating them. They knew it so well. And so they waited. And by the way, I'm not sure if the actual person, Amalek, was still alive at this point, because the grandson of Esav, you're talking about a couple of 100 years earlier, that was born. But nevertheless, this is his nation and his people. Their pledge of allegiance was to anticipate a time and day that they can bring to life the partial prediction of their great grandfather, Yitzhak Abinu, and that is take advantage of that day where the other nation, Yishak's descendants, Yaakov's descendants rather, are lowly and get the upper hand. And so they waited. They lied in ambush. Centuries of this nation being a slave nation in another country, waited for an exodus. Miracles, supernatural events, but you ever see, who cares? We're salivating. We're anticipating. When can we jump then? When can we oppress the weak? When can we take advantage? When can we ambush? When can we express our true hatred, not just for this nation, but to what they represent, and that is godliness? And they laid like a crouching lion for centuries in ambush until this one opportunity can present itself to them. And of course, they took advantage of the prediction of none other than Bil'am Harasha, that spoke about Amalek as being a warring nation. And of course, Yishak Abinu himself spoke about the fact that you live by the sword. And they were proud of that prediction. And they knew that that ran through their blood. And so it was Amalek that had no rational reasons, but all the reasons in the world driven by their hatred, that waited to absolutely explode with a display of all their evil in the package described to us in Parashat Kiteseh. And then perhaps we can reflect back to our parasha and those final few Pesukim in which Hashem himself spoke about his attitude to Amalek. And it's for that reason that Hashem said, Kiyad al Kesyah, as long as they're around, as long as there are remnants around, and according to many commentators, even if there are remnants not around, but as long as their spirits around, as long as they have a following, as long as they have those who are taking in their footsteps, I'm telling you right now, Moshe, my leader, your student, Yehoshua, put in his ears and let every leader know for all generations in the future and my nation that this struggle will continue. Because this is a struggle of the classic good versus evil, and faith versus lack thereof, and hatred versus goodness. And therefore, I right now, Kadosh Baruch Hu, Bichbodo Uba'asmo, I stand up and I declare war against all evil for the rest of the future of mankind, and especially against me and my nation. And that is the what and the why of the phenomenon of Amalek. Amen.